Winter in the Middle Ages is not a season, it is a test. The cold seeps through the walls, the fire dies out in the hearth, and breathing becomes the last source of warmth. In this reality, survival was not about wooden stoves. It was about ingenuity. When wood is a lord's property, when clothes are made of scraps, and the hearth smokes more than it warms, heat was extracted from anything that could burn, float, smolder, breathe. Stones, kizyak, animals, straw, smoke, food, even bodies. Everything became part of the heating system, not for comfort, for life. This story is about the ways to keep warm that history has forgotten, but the body remembers. About how the simplest solutions kept life in the hut until winter receded. Watch the video to the end and you'll learn how, in a world without insulation, stoves, and brick floors, peasants created heat from dung, hay, and earth. How every step on a warm floor was a step away from death, and how even the dirtiest thing in the world could be the most salvific. Winter in a peasant hut starts from below. Not from the wind in the cracks, not from the frost on the walls, but from the ground. The floor on which they live, eat, sleep, get sick and die is not planks. It is damp, bare, frozen ground. It's cold even in the daytime. At night, it's like lying on a rock. Clothes don't save you. The fire doesn't reach. Your body freezes because the cold hits you from below. Persistently, silently, slowly. And that's where a mixture comes in that wasn't invented in monasteries or books. It was found with feet, nearby, under hooves, under haystacks, under feet, dung, clay, straw. First, the manure is collected, fresh, warm, and thick, most often from cows, goats, or sheep. It is mixed with clay, which is found almost everywhere, especially in lowlands and riverbanks. Cut straw is added. They knead it all by hand or barefoot, like survival dough. When the mixture becomes pliable, sticky, viscous, it is applied to the floor. A layer the thickness of the palm of your hand. It is laid directly on the frozen ground. It is tamped down, smoothed, and left to dry for a day. Then another layer of straw, dry, loose, for cushioning. The whole structure becomes warm, elastic, a little fat to the touch. It doesn't warm itself, but it doesn't take heat from the body. That means it already saves you. In some regions, and especially in Scandinavia, Russia, and the Alpine valleys, skins, burlap, old canvases were placed on top of the flooring, but more often it was just straw. It was changed as it got dirty. The top layer was discarded. They dried it by the hearth. Sometimes burned, sometimes it was put in the stable. This flooring served not only as a floor, it became a sleeping place, a cot, a table, a bed. Children were laid on it. It was used for healing. They gave birth on it. They died on it. And no one thought it was strange, because there was no other. This method was not localized. Archaeological excavations in York, England, Novgorod, Saxony, and eastern France show traces of multi-layered floors made of dung, straw, and clay. In some houses, they were reinforced with wooden planks or flat stones at the edges, but in most, they were pure organic. The simplest, the most affordable, the most workable. The heat from manure lasts longer than from straw. It's denser, it breathes, and even though it loses its odor after drying, there is still residual heat inside. If an animal is lying on top of it, that heat increases. A pig lying on a bed of dung is like a warming pot, weighing half a man. And next to it, children, old people, women with infants. Not because of tenderness, it's warmth. Sometimes the same mixture was applied to the walls, in the corners, in the cracks, at the entrance, especially if it was blowing from the door. Sometimes rollers were molded and applied to the base of the wall. It would crack, it would be repaired, again and again. Dung was not considered dirt. In the Middle Ages, dirt was something that was useless. Dung was useful. It kept warm. It held its shape. It replaced stone, board, brick. Its odor was always present, but it didn't stand out because everything smelled and everything served a purpose. When the wood runs out, the clothes get wet and the hearth provides almost no light. A stone becomes what can hold the remnants of the day. Not a candle, not a rag, not a fur, but a simple stone, heated to the core, warm not by feel, but by essence. In a hut where there is no heating, no stove with a closed underblower, much less heaters, any stored heat is valued like gold. It cannot be wasted. It must be caught and saved. And that's why the peasants knew. A stone is a vessel of heat, mute but faithful. In the evening it was placed in the center of the hearth, not at the edge, not under the ashes, but right in the area where the coals were glowing red, where the cauldron was boiling. An hour, 2, 3, it would get hotter. Gradually, without a sound, and only at night, when everything in the house was quiet except snoring and coughing, the stone was taken out and turned into a heating pad. They did not take it with bare hands, it burned. They wrapped them in thick sackcloth, sheepskin, coarse canvas. Sometimes they put it in a leather pouch. And then at the feet of a child, under a woman's back, in the chest of a sick man, he lay beside me, like a silent guardian, not hot but alive. He breathed the residual warmth. If the stone was large, it was placed in the common planking, where everyone else was lying. It warmed the space, slowly, to the depth of the palm of your hand. Sometimes babies were placed around it. Sometimes an old man who couldn't get up anymore. He warmed as long as he could. Then he got cold. They didn't throw it away. They put him down again. In the morning, back in the hearth, some people carried such stones with them, under their cloak, on the road, in a sack. Especially if the journey was long, to a neighboring village, to the field, to hunting. A stone is like a personal source of warmth, like a fire in your pocket. Sometimes it warmed not only my hands, but also my food. It was put next to bread to keep it warm. Not just any kind. We needed ones that wouldn't crack from the heat. River smooth, rounded, poreless. Granite, basalt, limestone, depending on the region. Stones from banks, from fields, from old ruined buildings. If it cracked or broke, it was thrown away. But if it held, it would last for years. Sometimes it was passed on to children. In archaeological excavations in York, Hedabu, Novgorod, they found charred, blackened stones and layers of ash, which were not part of the hearth structure. They were lying on the side in the center next to each other. But they were not part of the structure. These are the warmers. No straps, no noise, just a stone, but with a story inside. Sometimes they put such a stone in the cradle. It was warmer than hay, it was safer than a candle. Sometimes it was given to a dying man, not as medicine, but as a farewell to warmth. And that's the whole point. The stone didn't save me. It was just a way to hold on for another hour, another night. It wasn't a symbol, it was a means. Silent, reliable, indispensable. In a house that smells of smoke and animals, a warm stone is part of the routine, part of hope. When the hearth burns out and there is no more coal, no more heat, no more light, the only thing that can still save is flesh, a living body. In a world where the temperature drops below zero at night, where the ground underfoot is frozen and the walls breathe wind, the warmth of the human body becomes the last means of survival. And the way people sleep is not a matter of habit, but a precise, calibrated mechanism. Peasants don't sleep alone. Never. Sleep is not rest. It's protection. In a damp hut, where everything is soaked with smoke, sweat, and manure vapor, under a thatched roof with frost dripping through it, they sleep huddled together like sheep in a pen. Not out of poverty, out of instinct, and from experience. The arrangement of the bodies is no accident. Inside are those who are weaker. Children, infants, the elderly, the sick. Closest to them are the mothers. They warm their breasts, their backs, their bellies. The outer circle is men, not because they're stronger, because they can bear the cold. Because if necessary, they will get up, go for coal, throw off their clothes. They sleep on straw, fur, fabrics, hay, and clay bedding. Often they sleep directly on the flooring, under which there is damp dung mixed with earth. Sheepskins, sackcloth, torn clothes are laid on top. They cover themselves with cloaks, rags, canvas. Sometimes they just huddle together so that there is no gap left. Animals are part of this circle. The pig warms his side. The goat lies down at your feet. The chickens are under the bench, under the deck, against the wall. Their breath, their fur, their warmth are precious. They are not just animals. They are living heaters. Not shelter, but breath. In a house where there is no stove, where the ceiling is smoked with smoke, even a goat becomes a wall between life and death. All this is not a theory. Archaeological finds in Scandinavia, Germany, Brittany, and Eastern Europe show houses with a single living area, without partitions, with direct accommodation of animals and people under one roof. No separate bedrooms, one warm zone, one hearth, one rhythm. Sleep is a structure. Old people are put down first, then women and children, then the men. Those who are later in life lie on the edge. The older ones, closer to the center. It all depends on temperature, age, usefulness. If you're sick, you sleep in the center. Healthy, by the door. Everything is subordinated to one thing, to keep the rest of the warmth. And if someone dies in their sleep, it's not a tragedy. It's a natural stopping point. The body stays in the circle. They don't take it away until morning. Sometimes because they're afraid of the cold. Sometimes because the body is still warm. As long as it's there, the others warm themselves. Even death in this ring continues to warm. No one complains that it's cramped, that someone snores. It smells bad. Everyone knows that inside the circle, you survive. Outside, no. Alone, even under 3 cloaks, freezes faster than a child in the center of a shared bed. So it's the same thing every night. Lay out the bedding. Check who's by the fire, who's cold, who hasn't coughed, who's already in bed, and lie down again. In the ring, into the warmth, in the silence. Watch the video to the end and you will learn why in the Middle Ages sleep was not a rest, but a ritual of protection. How warmth was transferred from body to body, from old people to children, from goat to man, and why there was no comfort in a peasant's hut, but the main thing was that it was warm, alive, close by, silent. In a winter peasant hut, the boundaries between man and animal are blurred, not out of savagery, out of necessity. With wood running low, walls freezing, and the hearth out before dawn, body heat is the last thing holding life together. And that salvation involves everyone who can breathe and keep warm, including livestock. Peasants do not keep livestock in separate stable. A stable is a luxury. Space is scarce. Walls not insulated. So animals live in the same room as people, under the same roof, on the same floor, in the same darkness. A goat, a pig, a sheep, a couple of chickens. Part of the thermal system of the house. Not invented, not described, not designed, but worked out over centuries. Their bodies are warm, their breath is heavy. They warm as well as the hearth, sometimes better. The hearth smolders, the goat breathes. The pig sleeps against the wall, where there's a particular pull. She lies down in the straw, huddled in a lump. She is not disturbed. Sometimes a child is laid next to it, closer to the skin, under the cloak. Sometimes a sick old man. The pig doesn't mind, it's warmer than any bed. The goat is kept by the door or closer to the middle. She's more active. She gives milk even in winter. She gets up when someone makes a noise. She can kick, yes, but she's warm, with fur, with steam coming out of her nostrils. Her fur smells like smoke. No one minds, because warmth is more important than smell. Sheep are a silent warmth. They are kept closer to corners where there are drafts. They don't make noise. They don't move. They just lie there. Their wool absorbs the cold. Their bodies are like absorbent cotton, motionless but alive. On particularly frosty nights, they are brought closer to people. The chickens are under the bench, under the floor. It's the warmest place. It's where the air that doesn't escape through the roof gathers. They sit in the straw, flapping their wings. Sometimes they fly, sometimes they just breathe. And that's enough. Even a dog is not a guardian, not a companion. She's a warming pad, lying at your feet, cuddled up against your back, becomes part of the bed. Sometimes the warmest part of the bed. It's not poverty, it's not an accident, it's a system, one of the oldest. Archaeologists confirm, in Europe from Ireland to Western Russia, in the northern parts of France, Germany, Denmark, they find half-long houses, so-called longhouses. In one half, people, in the other, cattle. Often without a wall, sometimes with a symbolic partition, but all under one roof, one air, one rhythm. It's 2 to 3 degrees warmer inside if the animals are around. That doesn't seem like much, but when it's -15 outside, those 3 degrees are the line between sleep and death, between coughing and delirium, between life and the cemetery outside the village. Yes, it's crowded. Yes, it's noisy. The goat is chattering. The chicken clucks. The pig snorts. But it doesn't bother you. It's warming. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you warm. Sometimes the cattle die, and then they don't bring it out right away. They wait, because even a dead body waxes while it's warm can save someone, especially a child, or a mother, or a little brother. Then they bury it, or eaten, but not before, because there is nothing alien here. All living things are part of the circle. Everything warm is part of the flesh of the house, and winter doesn't ask who is man and who is cattle. Winter checks if something is breathing nearby. If it breathes, you can survive. Fire in the Middle Ages was not a given. It did not live in the house. It had to be kept, fed, protected. And if you didn't have anything, you had to invent something that burned. Things that were usually thrown away or squeamishly avoided. Kiziak, dried manure mixed with straw. The simplest, the dirtiest, the most necessary. Collection begins in the summer. Warm days are the only time to harvest this fuel. Cow and sheep manure is the best. Pig manure is too greasy, does not dry well, and smells unpleasant. Horse manure crumbles. The softest, dense, viscous manure is given by those who live nearby, cattle that sleep in the same hut. It is collected in the morning, while it has not yet mixed with the earth. It still holds its shape. This manure is mixed with straw, chaff, grass, and sometimes with fine wood dust, if it has been collected by a carpenter or after felling. The mixture is kneaded with hands or bare feet, right in the yard on the bedding. Then they form flat, wide, finger-printed flakes, sometimes denser briquettes. Some even had wooden molds to make the same size. Dry in the sun, weeks if it's hot, months if the summer is wet. Spread on the fence, on the roof, on the walls of the hut. They turn them over. They make sure that it doesn't spread, doesn't get moldy. Dried kiziak is hard, like dry bread, rough, light. It smells like dry hay until it burns. Stored carefully, under a shed, in a stable, in the attic. Sometimes in a pile covered with straw so that it doesn't get wet. Sometimes in special nooks in the wall. A good stockpile is not a luxury. It is the assurance that the fire will not go out when winter enters the house. In winter, kiziak becomes the main fuel. It is not thrown into a blazing fire. It is used to support smoldering. It burns slowly. It takes a long time to give up heat. It is not the tongue of flame that warms, but the even, heavy heat coming from below. Especially if you put ash under it. It smolders all night, sometimes longer. It smells. It smokes. Eyes watering. The walls turn black. Hair smells like smoke. But no one complains, because in that smoke is life. Better bitter smoke than icy air. In especially difficult years when there is not enough kiziak, they add to it everything that can burn. Chaff, dried peels, rotten bark, small roots, moss, even dried dust from the floor. New cakes are made from the garbage pressed and dried by the fire. This method is not a local tradition, but a common European practice. It was used in the Alps, in Russia, in Scandinavia, in northern France, in the British Isles. Where wood was scarce, where firewood was under the control of the feudal lord, every courtyard had its own brick masonry of dung briquettes. Even monasteries used briquette, especially for heating outbuildings. Archaeological traces of kiziak are found everywhere, in ash deposits with high calcium and organic content, in characteristic prints on clay floors. It is hardly mentioned in written sources because it was obvious, like air, as dirt, as a necessity. Burning gutter snipe doesn't decorate, it does not warm quickly, it doesn't shine, but it holds. It's enough to heat porridge, to warm an infant, dry a shoe, save the hearth from death. and that's why it's cherished. When the lights go out in the house and the walls breathe cold, the last line of defense is clothing. Not fashion, not jewelry, not protection from the wind. Clothing in the Middle Ages is the second furnace, only the one worn on the body, the kind that you don't take off even when you sleep. Clothes that don't change for weeks because there's nothing to replace them with. Among peasants, clothes were not divided into everyday and home. It was divided into still keeps warm and not anymore. The cloak did not serve for rain. It served to keep the body heat in, stretched like a leather tent over hope. Clothes were built in layers, from leftovers, out of other people's, from scraps. One sleeve could be burlap, the other an old woolen trim. The hem was sewn from a sack, the bodice from a tarpaulin. Not because they had to, because you couldn't survive otherwise. Fur inside always, even if it's dirty, even if it's bald. They put it on the body not for comfort, but so that the inner warmth doesn't escape. Sheepskin, goatskin, sometimes fox skin, often old, cut, dried out, but still warm, overlapping wool. Peasants did not know cut in the modern sense. Their clothes were rectangles tied with cord, the simplest shirts without darts, fastened with string. A woolen piece is placed on the chest, wrapped over the shoulder, tightened at the waist. Another layer on top, the more the better. They put straw inside the clothes, dry, warm, crunchy straw. It is stuffed into pants, shoes, waistband, collar. Straw prickles, rustles, crumbles. But it keeps you warm. It creates a layer of air. It replaces the fur that's missing. Before going to bed, clothes are dried by the fire. They hang them on poles, put them on stones, on smoldering logs. Sometimes they warm them directly on themselves. They turn to the hearth until the cloth becomes hot. Then they lay down and fall asleep, keeping the heat. With body, cloth, breath. They cover themselves with whatever's left. A cloak, a sack, an old blanket, a torn curtain, a hood. Everything comes into play. Sometimes they cover the body with old canvases. Sometimes they put a rough piece of leather over the sleeper, just as a weight to keep the heat in. Shoes are part of the system. Boots are straw. Sometimes shreds of cloth, sometimes soft peat. On top, wraps, ropes, leather bands. They don't take off their shoes even at night, because to take them off is to lose heat, or freeze in the morning. A hat is always worn, even at home, even at night, especially at night. The head is covered with a wool sack, a hood, sometimes a sleeve. Half the heat escapes through the head, and they knew it instinctively. In monastic and village chronicles of the 14th century, it is mentioned, better than bread is an extra cloth, better than wine is a hat on a child. This is not an image, it's a practice, because one layer of clothing could mean the difference between fever and survival. Archaeological finds in Scandinavia, in Russia, in British lands confirm, clothes were multi-layered, worn, heterogeneous. Dense fabric on top of coarse. Inside, wool, leather, straw. People slept in it, died in it. They passed it on. And not because it's expensive, because it's alive. It wasn't washed, it wasn't taken off. It's been mended to the last stitch. As long as it holds, a man lives. And if it's torn, they sew it up, stuff it, rewind it, and wear it again. In a long winter, the cold doesn't just come through doors and cracks. It comes from above, from the attic, from a beam, from a cracked board above your head. The roof is the first target of wind, rain, snow. And if it misses even a drop, even a breath of frosty air, everything, the house is doomed. In the harsh northern lands of the Middle Ages, peasants didn't build a roof out of boards and tiles. They built it from the ground. An earthen roof is not a temporary measure. It's a strategy. It is a part of the house equal to the walls and floor. It is an extension of the hill. The house didn't stand on the ground. It grew into it. It was carved out of it like a cave, only not in the rock, but in the hill. And the roof was its top layer of turf. It all started with the frame, thick beams across the house like ribs. On top, crossbars, poles, sometimes willow branches covered with clay. On top, a dense layer of birch bark or bark. And then, the most important thing, layers of turf. It was cut from the meadow, rectangular layers with roots, with grass, with dense, moisture-rich earth. These layers were laid one on top of the other, overlapping like scales, sometimes up to half a meter thick. Layer by layer, the roof became green in the warm season and white in the cold season. Grass grew on it in the spring, in the fall, moss, in winter, snow. But underneath it all, the roof held, didn't let in, didn't breathe, didn't let the heat out. Because inside was the earth, and the earth knows how to preserve. Peat and turf are natural heat insulators. Peat gives out and takes in heat slowly. Even when wet, it keeps out frost. Even covered in snow, it doesn't freeze through. Archaeologists studying early settlements in Iceland, the Faroes, Ireland, and the north of Scotland note that the thickness of peat roofs was up to 1 meter. Such roofs survived for decades. They were not repaired. They were topped up. They were patched. They lived under them as if they were underground. Inside these houses, it's quiet, even when there's a storm outside, even when there's half a meter of snow overhead. Inside, the heat doesn't escape. The fire burns less. Less wood is needed. The air is heavier. Smoke hangs longer under the ceiling because the roof doesn't let it out. Smells like earth all the time. Clay, moss, damp sod, old roots, sometimes musty, sometimes grass. In the spring, when the snow comes down, the roof starts to drip. Then it gets resodded. They put new pieces of sod right on top of the old ones. If it leaks, they patch it. If it slides off, you shore it up. It's like a field. You have to take care of it. You have to feel it. Sometimes they even keep a small vegetable garden on the roof. Onions, garlic, grasses. Where the grass holds on, you can live. Where the moss is crawling, the roof is still alive. If the roof starts to crumble, it's a warning sign. It means the heat is escaping. It means winter can get in. Such roofs are especially common in Iceland, Norway, Ireland, northern Britain, and the Russian north. Where wood is scarce, stone is absent, and winter is longer than a year. In Iceland, turf houses stood until the 19th century. Some of them are still underground, and they keep warm better than modern barns. It is not just a roof, it is the top skin of the house, its skin, its protection. It requires labor, but it gives heat, silence, shelter. It binds the house to the earth. It does not oppose nature, but merges with it. Watch the video to the end and you'll learn how a roof could be alive in the Middle Ages, how it grew, aged, flowed, saved, and how not only heat but life itself was preserved beneath a layer of earth. When winter beats down from the sky, you can only save yourself with what used to be under your feet. When winter drags on, when the walls are covered with frost on the inside, when even the stones in the hearth get cold by dawn, there is only one way to keep warm, from the inside. Warmth not from fire, not from fur, not from a neighboring body. It's from the cauldron, from the food. The porridge that does not feed but warms. The peasants knew, a hungry body freezes faster. It's as empty as a barrel without a bottom. No matter how much you cover it, everything comes out. But if it is filled with something hot, thick, heavy, then you can hold out. Then sleep is not a mortal cold, but a slow retention of heat. That's why they boiled for the night, always. The cauldron is common, spoons, wooden, rough. The utensils are charred, clay, cracked, but they hold. We boiled what we had. Oats if you were in the north, peas if you were in the south. Sometimes mixed, sometimes they put it in the same thing. The goal is not flavor, the goal is density. Oatmeal porridge is the basis of winter meals in Ireland, Scotland, Scandinavia, and northern Russia. Boiled thick, so that a spoon could stand. It was not salted. Ashes and dried herbs, if there were any. Sometimes just water and oats. Inside, if you were lucky, a drop of lard, or a gnawed bone. Even the greasy imprint of a spoon in the cauldron was considered a taste. Pea porridge in the south. Germany, Flanders, northern France. It was boiled for a long time, until it's a paste. Its thickness was the key to making it work like coal in a stove. Long and steady. It left a heat inside the stomach, a heat that lasted till dawn. Sometimes flour, chaff, crushed eggshells. herb decoction, old onion hulks were added. Anything that could thicken and stand up. Because liquid food is not food. Liquid food doesn't keep you warm, only thick. Only things that are hard to lift with a spoon. Portions were not determined by appetite but by function. More for the one who would go to fetch water. More for the one who milked the goat. To the one who carried the fever. Children first. Babies were given porridge diluted with water. Old men, if there was any left. There were days when old people refused. Let the child have it, not out of pity, out of calculation. There's one in the dark, on the floor, by the hearth. Fingers, shaking from fatigue, hold the spoon like a knife. The spoon warms the fingers. The steam warms the face. The steam itself is already part of the dinner. Sometimes they inhale it slowly before they eat, to warm themselves from the inside before they even take a sip. If there was lard, put it in the center of the porridge. Don't stir it. Let it melt on top. Let everyone get at least a drop. Sometimes they dipped a piece of bread in it and gave it to someone who was coughing. Lard is not food. Lard is heat in its purest form. Porridge was not only cooked in the evening, sometimes once a day, sometimes in the morning to heat up a mug each, sometimes only at night. They cooked slowly, not hurriedly, saving fuel. Sometimes on kizyak, sometimes on ashes from yesterday's fire. The main thing was to boil. Monastic chronicles, including the Benedictine statutes and Charlemagne's Capitulare de Villis, specified it was obligatory to cook hot food in the evening when it was cold. This was considered not just a concern, but part of medical practice, ut corpus calorem reteniet, that the body retain heat. Archaeological finds in Northern Europe and in Russia show the remains of cinders on the inner walls of cauldrons are greasy, heavy, saturated with ash and croup slime. This is that porridge, not the kind that was served at feasts, but the one that fed and warmed every village in winter. As long as there is porridge in the house, there is life in the house. Even if everything is frozen, even if the clothes are covered with frost, even if death has already knocked. Porridge is like a heart. It beats from within, not noisily, but rhythmically. He's always there, from morning till night, from evening to dawn. Smoke is the invisible inhabitant of a peasant's house. It doesn't go out, it doesn't disappear. It lives under the ceiling. It sleeps on the beams. It settles on the walls. He is not an enemy, he's a habit, a way to keep warm. In most village buildings of the early Middle Ages, from Iceland to Russia, pipes are not built. This is not a necessity, but a rarity. The hearth is open, often right on the earthen floor. In the center of the house, closer to the cattle, closer to the people. The flame dances in a circle of stones above it, a boiler above the boiler, a crossbar, and above, soot. Layer after layer, year after year, because there's no exhaust. If there is a hole in the roof, cover it. With a rag, a board, sod in winter, cover it with clay, because the heat goes out with the smoke. And if the smoke remains, so does the heat. It may be difficult to breathe at eye level, but the walls don't freeze, but the ash smolders longer. But a child sleeping on a straw won't turn blue from the cold overnight. The smoke settles in layers. At the top is dense, acrid, almost opaque. Underneath another, closer to the floor, cleaner but colder. Grown-ups know that you should stand in the house bent over, breathe slowly, speak softly. Children play squat. Women cook sitting by the fire. Old people hardly ever stand up. They live in the lowest layer of the house where they can still breathe. No one's complaining. Eyes watering. The voice is hoarse. But don't open the slit. Don't touch the flap. Because smoke is the last thing left when the embers go out. It hangs, it holds, it breathes. It replaces the roof when it freezes. This effect is well known to historians. In Anglo-Saxon, Slavic, Germanic, and Scandinavian houses of the centuries, there are no remains of stationary chimneys. Instead of them, a thick layer of cinders on the upper beams, smoky roofs, darkened by smoke walls found during archaeological excavations in Hedeby, York, Novgorod, Uppsala. This is the mark of living with smoke. But smoke doesn't just warm, It dries, it preserves, it protects. There are herbs hanging from the ceiling. Motherwort, yarrow, mint, they don't mold. Fish hanging from the rung cures slowly, evenly. Meat, smokes, soaking in the smoke. Even bread takes longer to dry if you hang the bag higher up. Wool, leather, ropes, even food. Everything is permeated with smoke. It's an integral part of the atmosphere. Clothes smell of it. Hair, the bedding, livestock. Even the baby, even the icon on the wall is covered in soot. But no one scrubs it off, because that smell is winter. Sometimes someone suffocates, especially children, especially sick people. Sometimes they die, but more often than not, they survive. Because without smoke, everyone would die. Without smoke, there would be no fire, no food, no warmth. It makes the house gloomy, makes you move slowly, hides the face, makes everything quieter. But it holds the line between cold and life. As long as the smoke hangs from the ceiling, winter hasn't entered the house, not yet. As long as it's still there, we can live. Watch the video to the end and you will learn how, in a dark, smoky hut, smoke was not an enemy, but a ceiling under which life was held. How it enveloped, warmed, burned, but saved. And how the peasants of the Middle Ages breathed it every day because there was nothing more important than keeping the fever alive, even in the form of smoke. In a house that breathes smoke in winter, where the walls shake in the wind and the hearth is silent after midnight, the only thing that can protect at night is what has already lived its life. Old things, old rags, old clothes that don't warm you from the outside, but can warm you if you cover yourself with them. Peasants did not know down jackets, woolen plaids, or fur blankets. Blankets were made from clothes that were no longer worn, from clothes that no longer made sense to restitch, from sacks that no longer held grain, patches that were thicker than the fabric itself. They collected them from the house, from the barn, sometimes from neighbors. Each patch was another hour of warmth. No one went into winter with a new one. They went into winter with what they had left behind. Old shirts were cut off, unfolded, sewn together. Old pants were torn to ribbons. All this was joined into wide, heavy, rough blankets. Not for beauty, for survival. Everything possible was stuffed inside. Dry straw, crumpled grass, sheep's wool, hemp, old rags, shreds, even ashes. Tightly but not tightly, so that there was air. The air kept the heat in. Sometimes they put moss inside, if there was no straw. Sometimes dry earth covered with clay. If it overflowed, it was sewn back together. If it fell out, new stuff was added. The outside is burlap, thick, dense, coarse. It was sewn with thick thread, sometimes from hemp or linen. Sometimes horsehair was used instead of thread. Fingers were pierced, needles broke, but they sewed because they knew that one such blanket could warm 3 people at once, or even the whole family. These things were not only used at night. During the day, they were used to cover doors, windows, even walls. They were used to divide space, to separate the place where they slept from the place where they kept firewood. They hung sackcloth from the ceiling, like a curtain, in order to retain the heat somehow. The house turned into a cocoon, a closed, deaf space where they breathed, coughed, and whispered through the rags. They slept in them like nests. They were rolled up, tucked in, sometimes tied on the chest. Old men hid their feet under such blankets, children, their heads. If there was a hot stone, it was put inside, in the center. It burned for another hour, 2 hours sometimes until morning, smelled like smoke, piss, rot, but it smelled warm. Sometimes one blanket was passed between families. Today to you, tomorrow be for us. It was cherished, repaired, dried by the hearth, hung on poles to keep it dry. It could be the only one, and they took turns wrapping themselves in it. Sometimes a dying man lay under it. Sometimes it was a newborn. Archaeologists in Northern Europe, in Russia, in Ireland, and in the Alpine valleys find the remains of such coverings in layers of organic matter, under flooring, in clay corners. This is not clothing. It is a textile that served as a home. Not a thing, but a space. These bedspreads had no names. There was no ornament, there was no shape, but they were. They held life where everything else froze. Heat in the Middle Ages was not expected. It was extracted, it was created. It was gathered piece by piece, from dung, from the smoky air, from a neighbor's body, from an old sack, from porridge cooked on smoldering gutter snipe. And every such method was not a convenience, but a chance. There was no engineering here. It was memory, habit, a layer of experience passed on silently. How to take shelter, how to breathe in smoke, how to sew a blanket from scraps, how to warm oneself without fire. Not for comfort, for the morning. Stones by the hearth, dung under the walls, a goat in the headboard, straw in the boots. All this was not an oddity, but a structure of survival. And in this structure, the main thing is not what you warm yourself with. The main thing is that you don't give up. We have forgotten these ways, but they remember us. There's patience in them. They are logic. They are the cold that cannot be beaten, but can be endured. And if you listen, you can hear someone whispering under the burlap, "Quiet, don't move, it will be warmer." If you want to dive deeper into the everyday life of the past, subscribe to the channel. Here we don't talk about feats, but about how we lived, how we endured, and how we survived, without anything but will and knowledge.